Is he one of the greatest American professional wrestlers of all time? Was he so popular he got the main event of WrestleMania changed? Does he have questionable takes on fruit? Is this everything you need to know to get smartened up on Bryan Danielson? My name's Michael. Welcome to Suplex. Bryan Danielson was born May 22nd, 1981 in Aberdeen, Washington. Father Donald Buddy Danielson, who was a lumberjack, and mother Darlene, who was a therapist, which is very cool because that math checks out when you look at Bryan. He looks like he could fall a tree and help you with the deep resentment you may have towards women. Growing up in Aberdeen, a small logging town 2 hours outside of Seattle, Bryan wasn't your average kid. He was introverted and shy, but he still had a passion for sports. Football, track, you name it, but there's one thing that grabbed his attention more than anything else, and that's the art form known as pro wrestling. Like many of us, Danielson got the wrestling bug and grew up loving watching wrestling on television, mesmerized by the larger-than-life characters and intense action. Bryan even recalled wrestling being like a fixation for him growing up. He said in a recent article, Aberdeen by no means was a wealthy area. It was kind of a poor logging community and we didn't have much money growing up. But my mom and dad saw that I really loved pro wrestling. So when they would go to the video store, they would always rent me a VHS tape of wrestling for me to watch because it seemed like it was the only thing I was interested in. But unlike most of us, Bryan wasn't content with just watching. He wanted to be in that ring. So at 16 years old, he made the sane and rational decision that any teenager would do, and that's join Dean Malenko's wrestling school. I find this incredible because I think it's a real insight into who Danielson is as a wrestler. Like even at the age of 16, he looked at the man who had almost no charisma on television and like saw him wrestle, and he was like, that. I want to do that. I want to be a good wrestler. I want to be a good wrestler. Unfortunately, by the time Bryan graduated high school, the Iceman School had shut down. So if you can't learn from the man of 1,000 holes, I guess you got to go with your plan B. So at 18, Bryan packed his bags and headed to the great state of Texas. Why Texas, you may ask? Well, that's because he was going to train under the guidance of a little semi-known wrestler named Shawn Michaels. Shawn had just opened his wrestling school. By the way, this is late 90s Shawn Michaels. This is DX Shawn Michaels we're talking about, and Bryan was going to be one of his first students, which is crazy. Could you imagine learning to wrestle from Shawn Michaels? It'd be like learning to drive from Lewis Hamilton. That would be insane. Like, this is the guy who was main eventing WrestleManias while you were in middle school. Or you're watching your VHSs at home, Shawn Michaels was on those, and now you're learning from him. Probably a big reason why Danielson's so good in the ring. Bryan soaked up all the training HBK had to offer, the bumps, the moves, the psychology of wrestling, and he was a natural, earning the reputation of being a technical prodigy. And it was that reputation that caused HBK to give Danielson a moniker that he would still use to this day, the American Dragon. The reasoning behind HBK's name for Danielson? He said, Danielson, quotes, wrestles like one of those Japanese guys, end quote. I did try to warn you that we were working with 90s HBK here. Anyways, while Danielson's classmates were chasing WWE contracts, Bryan had his eyes set on something a little different. Bryan wanted to hone his craft on the independent scene, and one of the first places he went after graduating HBK School was Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, which, if you don't know, is a Japanese deathmatch promotion founded by the guy who Jon Moxley dresses like. If you'd like us to do a Smartened up on FMW, please let me know in the comments below. Wrestling anywhere and everywhere he could, Bryan Danielson became a name to watch, a true wrestler's wrestler. A lot of people may know Danielson spent over 10 years working the indies, but were you aware that Danielson had a developmental deal with WWE in the 2000s? That's right, from 2000 to 2003, this is where Daniel Bryan received more training, not only in the ring, but in life, from British wrestling legend William Regal. He's a man! More on him later. Back to Danielson's indie career. Legendary matches in Ring of Honor in the mid to late 2000s made Danielson an internet darling. And in 2009, if you were an internet wrestler with some buzz, it was only a matter of time before that phone rang with a Stamford, Connecticut area code. Fast forward to 2010, Bryan finally gets his shot in the WWE, but things don't go exactly as planned. First, he debuted as a part of the inaugural season of NXT. And let me stop you right there. This isn't the NXT you know and love today. This NXT was more of a reality show / game show. Every contestant who was a rookie would be paired with a WWE superstar. Bryan was paired with The Miz. I know what you're thinking. That's not exactly a match made in heaven. I can't think of two more different wrestlers between those two. I'm not saying The Miz is like bad in the ring by any stretch of the imagination, but like the work rate guy who was like, I'm going to go spend 10 years on the indies versus The Miz who steered his reality TV career into pro wrestling. I guess there's no wrong way to get to the top. Bryan's time on NXT was rough. Despite being one of the most skilled wrestlers in ring on the roster, he was constantly portrayed as the underdog, which, to be fair, did become part of his charm. But this is a guy we know is capable of feats of violence with almost surgical-like precision, and the WWE Universe needed to see it. And see it they did. You may remember a little group called the Nexus. Well, the Nexus attacked John Cena, as one is wont to do, and caused general destruction to the ringside area. It's one of the best endings in Raw if you don't consider how that story ends. But I digress. In the melee, Danielson choked Justin Roberts with his own necktie. Justin Roberts is a ringside announcer. He is now with AEW. If you haven't seen him, he's really good at his job. Anyways, WWE said that was too violent and fired Danielson. So a decade. Hard work to get to this point, and it's just taken away. Understandably, Danielson was crushed and needed to get away to do some soul searching and figure out what his next steps in life were going to be. Was pro wrestling in the cards for him? Yeah, of course it was. Danielson was on the indies 2 weeks later beating up Eddie Kingston. The hiatus from WWE did not last long, as Danielson was gone 2 months and he was brought back. So Bryan Danielson was back in the WWE and now going by Daniel Bryan. I would really love to have been the guy who gets to name WWE wrestlers. At some point it just seems like you switch the first name and the last name and zhuzh it up a bit and you're there. Like, some of this work really feels like it was done at Friday at 5. I'm going to go on a tirade here. We all know that Chili McFreeze was one of the names pitched for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Somebody looked at that piece of paper, wrote down Chili McFreeze and Frost McFang, and they were like, it's good work, boys. It's good work. Let's go to lunch. Back to Daniel Bryan in WWE. He was on fire. The fans were behind him in a way WWE had not seen in years. But no matter how much the fans were behind him, WWE wasn't so sold on Bryan Danielson, wasn't sold on what he brought to the table, wasn't sold on him as the face of the company. But this love for Bryan turned into the phenomenon known as the Yes Movement. The year's now 2013, and Bryan had won the WWE Championship, but things quickly went south when he dropped the title, sparking a series of events that made the fans rally behind Danielson even more. WWE wasn't convinced that Bryan was main event material. They did see him as a great wrestler, sure, but not the face of the company. So what did they do? They slotted him into a mid-card storyline with the Wyatt family, a creepy cult-like faction led by Bray Wyatt. And yes, it was one of those times that the Wyatt family was not written well. That is a faction filled with hits and misses, and I really wish they had a few more hits. For a short time, Bryan joined the Wyatt family, which the fans absolutely hated. But this seemed to all be part of a bigger plan. In one of the most unforgettable moments of his career, Bryan turned on Bray Wyatt in a steel cage match on Raw. This sent the entire arena into a frenzy, and they erupted as Bryan attacked Wyatt, finally freeing himself from the group's clutches. But it wasn't just the attack that made this moment special. It's what happened next. Bryan climbed his way to the top of the cage, and the entire arena chanting, "Yes! Yes! Yes," in unison as he stood tall, leading the chant himself on the top of the world as the WWE Universe looked on. This wasn't just a wrestler standing up to his oppressor. This was a movement, the Yes Movement, and the WWE could not ignore it anymore. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Despite the overwhelming support of fans, WWE still had different plans for WrestleMania 30. The proposed main event was Batista, who had just returned to WWE from Hollywood. If you want to know more about Dave Batista, watch our episode of Smartened Up on him. I'll put the link in the description. He was going to take on Randy Orton for the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. Fans, no, they didn't want this. The fans, they weren't having it. They wanted Bryan, and they made sure the WWE knew it. Week after week, the WWE Universe hijacked the show with yes chants. Every time Batista or Orton appeared, the crowd drowned them out with the chants for Bryan. It all came to a head on March 10, 2014, when the Yes Movement took over an episode of Raw on one of the most iconic segments in WWE history. Bryan led a group of fans into the ring and refused to leave until he got what he wanted, staging his own Occupy WWE protest. Triple H came out and he made a stipulation. At WrestleMania 30, Triple H would take on Bryan Danielson. Danielson won. He would be added to the main event for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. The WWE Universe had spoken, and the WWE had no choice but to listen. WrestleMania 30 rolls around, and Bryan has a massive challenge ahead of him. First, he has to get through Triple H, a man who had been holding him down for months. And then, and only then, if he could pull that off, he'd get to face Batista and Randy Orton in the main event. The odds were stacked against him. 2 matches in one night, one against Triple H, but we're talking about Bryan Danielson here. The match with Triple H was an absolute war, and in the end, Bryan did what he does best. He persevered. He beat Triple H clean in the middle of the ring, earning his spot in the main event. Post-match, Triple H attacked Bryan, targeting his already injured shoulder. Bryan was going into the biggest match of his life already at a huge disadvantage. But if you think that's going to stop Bryan, think again. The main event was a grueling battle with Batista and Orton throwing everything they had at him. At one point, it looked like it was all over for him as Bryan was powerbombed onto the announce table and taken out on a stretcher. But he wasn't done yet. In one of the most emotional moments in WrestleMania history, Bryan fought his way back into the match. Bryan would eventually lock in the yes lock on Batista, forcing him to tap out. And just like that, Bryan did the impossible. He won the WWE World Heavyweight Championship in the main event of WrestleMania. In the process, completing one of the greatest underdog stories in the history of pro wrestling. This wasn't just a victory for Bryan. This was for every fan who had chanted yes, every fan who believed in him, and it is a moment that'll be remembered forever. Though Daniel Bryan was a WrestleMania legend, the man, Bryan Danielson, had a different recollection of WrestleMania 30 at the time. Danielson recalled the ending shot of WrestleMania when he's yesing and the pyros exploding around him as incredibly painful. For the first time in his whole career, Danielson was legitimately injured. And the next few weeks would be a series of highs and lows for him. A week after Mania, he married his wife, fellow wrestler Brie Bella, and then another week after, Bryan's father suddenly passed away. A few weeks after, Bryan lost all strength in his right arm, and he required neck surgery. Here's a man who pro wrestling had been an absolute constant through his entire adult life. For the first time, that constant wasn't there anymore. Not only that, he was facing the recent loss of his father. Bryan's father and mother divorced when Bryan was really young. Danielson's dad was a struggling alcoholic, and it really drove a wedge in the family. Though Danielson did have a relationship with his father, it was frayed because of his father's alcoholism. Remember when I mentioned William Regal training Danielson in and outside of the ring? Well, Lord Regal himself had battled some of the same demons that Bryan's father had faced. He was able to teach Bryan to love the person his dad is without feeling the need to change him. Things wouldn't get much better for Danielson. And after years of wear and tear, Bryan's body of work began taking a toll on his literal body. He suffered multiple concussions coming back, and in 2016, he was forced to retire from in-ring competition. I remember it like it was yesterday. The promo on Raw, it was absolutely heartbreaking. Fans around the world couldn't believe Bryan's career was over. I couldn't. The next few years were some of the toughest, and to add insult to Bryan's injury, after Bryan's retirement, he was set to film the first season of his wife and sister-in-law's 2-time Teen Choice Award nominated reality TV show, Total Bellas. Yeah, right after announcing his retirement. And yes, if you are not familiar with Total Bellas, that first season, which they filmed right after Bryan's retirement, Brie and Danielson move into John Cena and Nikki's house, which I'll say is probably not the best place to unwind and not think about wrestling. John has so many rules about shoes and dinner. What's going on in your life that you care so much about the shoes and when you have dinner? The years away from the ring were some of the hardest in Danielson's life, despite being around wrestling still. He was made the general manager of SmackDown, but Danielson wanted more. Danielson never gave up hopes of returning to the ring, and in 2018, after 2 years of extensive testing and rehabilitation, Bryan was medically cleared to compete again. The Dragon is back, baby! Woo! Bryan picked up right where he left off, winning the WWE Championship again, as showing a more aggressive side, that Danielson that we know and love from. He also gave the WWE Championship a new eco-friendly makeover. I know a lot of people don't like this belt, but I love this belt. I would never own this belt. I would never want this belt in my house, but I love the fact that it exists. Yes, do more stuff like this. Danielson even had the opportunity to pass on a moment to another deserving wrestler with a similar grassroots movement behind him in Kofi Kingston. But as time went on, Bryan began to feel the itch to try something new again. He had done it all in WWE, and there was a new challenge on the horizon. And in 2001, Bryan made the bold decision to leave World Wrestling Entertainment and join All Elite Wrestling. Reverting back to his old name, Bryan Danielson, he made his AEW debut at All Out. Immediately, he set his sights on the top of the card, and well, he should. He's that damn good. His first match in the company was a 30-minute time limit draw against Kenny Omega. Bryan has been tearing it up in AEW, facing off against some of the best wrestlers on the planet, from Will Ospreay to Okada, MJF, Hangman Page. Bryan has shown them all he hasn't lost a step. He's still the same relentless, hard-hitting, technical master that fans fell in love with all those years ago on the indies. Whether he's in the ring, putting on 5-star matches, or mentoring the next generation of wrestlers, Bryan's legacy is cemented as one of the greatest of all time. And that brings us to today. Danielson says that 2024 will be his last year as a full-time wrestler. At All In at Wembley Stadium, Bryan Danielson will create history, win or lose. Win, and he'll capture his first title in AEW, the AEW World Heavyweight Championship. Lose, and he'll retire from wrestling. And either way the outcome goes at All In, Bryan Danielson has deserved it. Either becoming the top guy in AEW, or by calling it a day on one of the best professional wrestling careers ever. And there you have it, folks, the story of Bryan Danielson, from a shy kid in Washington to one of the most respected names in professional wrestling. My GOAT, the greatest of all time, Bryan Danielson. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments who you want to see on the next Smartened Up. And until next time, remember, pro wrestling is predetermined. Your life isn't. Go do something great today.